Yeah, sorry, my thing's being weird. All right, how about now? Can you guys see a Google slide by any chance?
We see like the top of it, but not the whole thing.
Okay, this is super weird. So I did this before. I don't know why it's acting like this now.
No worries, we survived teaching through COVID.
Yeah,
We know what it's like.
yeah. Um, why is it only showing me that?
It's interesting that it only shows like a little slice of your screen and not the full screen.
Yeah, I even did this and it never did it. It didn't do this yesterday, I swear.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, the nice thing is the speaker after you is not here,
Oh,
so we got some time. Ah, there we
there we
go.
go. Okay, there we go. Now you guys can
Okay.
see my slides.
Yeah, what if you click on slideshow now? Will that make it full screen?
Yes, it will.
I hope. If that screws you up, then that's on me. Hey, look at
Nah,
that. You
you're
got to
good.
talk.
There we go. Oh, all right, you guys ready?
Let's do it.
All right. So, hi everyone. I want to thank you guys for giving me the time and the opportunity to present my project so far. My name is Jake Pastis, and I'm a senior at Syracuse University. And what I wanted in the research topic that I wanted to discuss was, does plate discipline change in the MLB when a player gets traded mid-season? All right, let's get started. All right, so the introduction. So this is just an overview of like plate discipline. So we see a lot of metrics such as outside swing percentage and zone swing percentage. But the problem with those is that it's really hard to like contextualize the values of those run expectancies. The reason being is because run expectancy accounts for in-game situation, pitch type, pitch quality, and hitter ability, which the metric that which outside zone and inside zone swing do not have that type of context. And it's also worth mentioning that those statistics are season level, not pitch by pitch. So, given that it's season level, we don't get the context of evaluating a player's plate discipline on a season level when in a pitch by pitch we could totally do that. However, given that, it's important to know that batters that do have good plate disciplines, they make plate appearances go longer. Like they'll keep fouling pitches that they keep fouling good pitches. They get a feel for the pitcher arsenal, so when they do that, they could up the pitcher's count and therefore get the bet potentially get the better of him, make him work. And then last but not, and certainly not least, they'll be able to swing and take when absolutely necessary. So that's those are qualities that GMs are definitely look out for when evaluating hitters at the deadline. So if they're going to do that, using outside zone swing and zone swing percentage wouldn't be the move. Wouldn't be the move just because they don't have the context the way that uh, that run expectancy does. So we're going to look at the density plot for run expectancy. This is across all of the MLB player, like every single MLB player, not just the ones that were only traded, but like every single one. So looking at the run expectancy, you usually see a higher density around 0.5, 0.03, which kind of makes sense because that's usually the run expectancy value for a ball. So that does make sense. And then the RE24, the run expectancy for every 24 outcomes, that one's very symmetrical, which also makes sense because usually the differences are usually very minor, around like hovering around the zeros and slightly above and less than that. So from there we get a normal density plot. So when modeling uh so when we're modeling the data, so we have to look at three things. One is the probability of outcomes in a play. So when I say probability, that would mean singles, doubles, triples, home runs, outs, swings and misses, and fouls are included on this. And then transitioning from that, we also model the strike probability just to ensure that pitchers do, just to say that, but this because this is accounting for a how aggressive like how much the umpire strikes the zone, and B, this is just averaging the players' heights to create the strike zone. And then last but not least, we use those models to transition to the change in obvious score, which basically means that uh, means that the hitters are able to swing or take on not only the pitches that are easy but also the pitches that are like super difficult to chase at. So we're going to start with calculating the probability of strike. So when doing this, I created a logistical model to not only use the plate metrics displayed on the left, but also to once again like visualize the average strike zone for every single player from 2015 to 2024. So looking at the strike zone on the right, you get to see that the umps do favor the pitcher when calling strikes just a smidge on the outside of the strike zone as well as slightly above the strike zone. So that's something that's worth noting. And then on the left is the variables. So plate X, plate Z, and then the reason why I squared plate X and plate Z and also combine them is because the strike zone isn't exactly linear. So we had to account for that by squaring plate X as well as plate Z while also multiplying the two. So that's definitely something that was worth noting there. So that's how I was able to calculate the probability of strike zone. And then moving on to modeling the outcome given swing. So in this one, we're trying to predict the actual outcome. So like I said, each of the 7 outcomes that happened only when the batter swings. So that would be singles, doubles, triples, home runs, outs, misses, and fouls. And while modeling for that, we account for 3 variables, which I divide into 3 subsections. So one would be batter attributes. So that would be how fast the batter swings, their age, as well as their swing length. So I felt those properties of the batter would be super important when looking at the label, just because those are the best pitch by pitch metrics that capture those for batters. And then we have a ton of attributes for pitchers. So their handedness, pitch type, spin rate, and release speed, how effective their speed is. And given the new addition from Baseball R, we got arm angle. And then the pitch locators in plate X and Z and PFX X and Z. So we wanted to get the location of the pitcher, the effectiveness of the pitcher, and the pitch type. So player types or how quality of player is not controlled, just because we wanted to get the full like information about the player and pitchers themselves. And then lastly, the game situation, we have balls, strikes, and outs went up. So we wanted to capture everything when accounting for or predicting the label. All right. So, and then the importance variables of that. So I modeled the launch angle, speed, BABIP value. So those 3 were the most important. BABIP value, which is basically a lot of ones and zeros, is a luck-based metric. And I was expecting to see like other pitching metrics up there. I thought release speed would be higher up on the list, but it also makes sense that variables such as launch angle and launch speed were up there as well, just because it fully displays the ability of the batter to not only be able to track the pitch on time, but to also provide the perfect launch angle on it. So it was interesting to see BABIP value on the top, just because it's a block-based metric. All right, and now moving on to the change in obvious score intuition. So the intuition behind this is this. So those are values between 0 and 1. So 0 would mean that it's not like the pitch is not up. Like it's not up. Like it's obvious, but you didn't do much with it. And then the negatives would actually, sorry, it's -1. No, 1. So if it's obvious and you made the incorrect decision, you receive a large negative for that at bat. And then when you make the correct decision on a not obvious pitch, then you receive a large positive. So if you get like a slider that like is an effective slider and it just misses the strike zone, but you decide to take anyway, then you would have a large positive to your obvious score. So so that's the intuition. It's basically how well the batter could see the ball and how effective they could swing the ball as well. So it's accounting for both. And then last but not least, and this is how we're going to model the score. So we're using the same attributes as before, but we're going to apply it to the obvious score. So we accounted for game situation as well as the pitcher and batter attributes for for change in obvious scores. So from there, so yeah, those are the attributes for the obvious score, which was also ran in a logistic model. Um the outcome model was made by an XG boost model, and so in summary, we ran two logistic regressions and an XG boost model. So let's look at the results for change in obvious scores. So the overall leaders. So this is looking at the data from 2015 to 2024. So at the top, you get Corey Dickerson in 2019. He was able to see the ball well and hit it as well in 2019. So his obvious score was a 0.196. And then Edmundo Sosa, Bader, Stowers, and Mitch Moreland were all the respective leaders within the entire data set of the obvious score. And then the guys at the bottom were Gerard Dyson, Rob Refsnyder, Josh Van Meter, Lane Thomas in 2021, and Brett Phillips. So yeah, those are everyone that have the obvious score, or the top five highest scores, or biggest changes in obvious scores since they were traded, and the lowest on the right. So I want to thank you guys for listening to my presentation. I'm open up to the floor with any type of questions. Thank you. Yes, Kendall.
Oh, I didn't have a question. I was just clapping.
Oh, my bad. Thank you. Yes, Professor Goodman.
Yeah, and I screwed up and I clicked the wrong thing. Sorry about that.
All good. Does anyone have any questions regarding the process? I'm more than happy to answer them.
Did you talk earlier? I don't know if I missed it about what you were doing most of your work in, what language, what program, what you did your
Yeah.
analysis with?
So everything I did was in R. Every data that I scraped from is from Baseball R. So with that, I just use a lot of data from mostly Baseball Savant, and I use a few things from Fangraphs as well.
I have a question now, I guess.
Oh, yeah, sure thing.
Is there potentially data that you didn't have access to that you think could improve your analysis?
That's a good question. So as far as like data, I feel like that since given the new update in Baseball R like a few weeks ago, I was able to access awesome variables for pitching attributes such as arm angle, which I used in my model. But as far as like getting pitch by pitch data, I will admit that downloading pitch by pitch data from 2015 to 2024, let's just say, did terminate a few of my R sessions. So, but other than that, the data itself was like really effective. So I didn't think there was like any other data that I could have borrowed from. So I thought everything was perfect from here on out.
Cool.
I think Joshua has a question.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, well done on the swing decision metric, Jake. Very similar to Eagle in the approach too. I liked it. Can you talk a little bit more about your variable selection in your models and what you think the different variables might contribute to those?
Yeah, absolutely. So did you have a particular variable in mind or just like all of them? Or like all the models, excuse me.
I think I'm most curious about the ball in play model or the result of a swing model because that's like the hardest thing to predict pretty much about baseball is a ball in play, the result of a ball in play, especially on a pitch that you don't even know how well it was hit. So So yeah, just the variables there, I'd say.
So when doing the I'm sorry, the labels, the outcomes for that model. So I didn't have a ton of like batter attributes that I want to include. So the best I had was bat speed and swing length as well. So when looking at swing length compared to this, I wanted to see like if swing length had anything to do with like singles, doubles, triples. Like sometimes, like for singles in particular, you could have like a really long swing length, and with that, sometimes you might able to just like leave a bloop single, get like when you have to extend outward, and then sometimes it'll just fall in. So I wanted to include that as far as like batter attributes, and then pitcher attributes. I thought it would be interesting to see like their arm angle and how that would result, like how effective their arm angle was into like deceiving the batter, and then release speed, how fast they'd be able to release an effective speed, how fast and well effective would the pitcher be able to uh
Patient and enjoy the talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Can everybody see this? I just want to make sure before. Oh, we can't see it? Oh.
I can see a document. It says click to exit full screen.
Oh, okay. Let me try this then. This might work better. Are we able to see it now? Okay. So if
Yep.
I go back into the slideshow, are we able to see it? Or is it back to the exit full screen?
Yeah, I don't see anything now. Just says
Okay.
loading.
So if that's all right, I'll present it like this, if that works. I
Absolutely.
guess that's the best way to do it. So, hi, I'm Colin. I'm currently a master's student here at Syracuse. Um, and alongside Hunter, Charlotte, and Dr. Ehrlich, we decided to look at partner effects on the PGA Tour. More importantly, just how pairing dynamics work in professional golf and how they affect performance. So we decided to look at this in three ways. The first was kind of just like a baseline of how partners' performance affects one's own performance. And with that, we wanted to see if playing with stronger ability opponents, heightens your game or lessens it, whether it's through, kind of there's increased motivation to play better, or if also playing with better opponents kind of just, deters you, scares you off a little bit, and you play a little bit worse. Next, we want to dive into this a little bit more, seeing about how when playing with the higher skilled opponent, if they're playing better than expected that day or worse than expected, how that affects, and kind of, if they're having a very great day, if you're going to, play better, have a great day yourself, or again, if that's just going to deter you, you're going to get scared by the amazing play you're seeing, or, kind of play down and play lesser. And then finally, we just want to look at a superstar effect. And what this was is, we did this off of earnings. And if just playing with superstars, if you're going to play better, if you're going to kind of match the intensity, the gameplay, the ability, or if, the increased crowd, the increased attention you're going to get, if that's kind of going to deter you and make you play worse. And so looking into literature behind some of these, the first one by Gurman, it looked at peer effects in the workplace, and more importantly, just how partner effects and group pairings in professional golf tournaments work. And what they found is when you're in random groups in professional golf tournaments, playing with a higher ability opponent, it really didn't have any effect on your own performance. What they saw was that, when you're playing at such a high ability, no matter if you're playing with great opponents, lesser opponents, or opponents of the same level, you're a great player at the end of the day. And expect, this really works within like PGA, something like that, where when you're a great player at the end of the day, you're going to be a great player. If someone else is playing at a heightened ability, you might play up a little bit, you might play down a little bit, but at the end of the day, you're going to play your own ability. You've been doing this for a long time. You're great for a reason. That's how it's going to be. And finally, with McFall and Rothoff, they kind of looked at risk-taking dynamics. And what they looked at was on par fives, looking at second shots and seeing how that worked out. So with the second shot in the par five is, you could really take a risk here, try and get in, into an eagle situation, put yourself into an easier birdie situation, or you could, take it back, take a less risky approach, lay up, kind of, play for the birdie or maybe the par, get out of there, take your medicine, as a lot of people like to say. And what they found here is players playing on or near the cut tend to play riskier, trying to put the game in their own hands and make sure that they're the ones affecting their outcomes, whether it be good or bad, but they want to be the ones to affect their own outcomes and own destiny. And what we saw here was with playing with, superstars like Tiger Woods, they also tended to take riskier shots. So whether that be seeing Tiger take riskier shots and it paying off for him, or just wanting to play up to his ability and take riskier shots to kind of match his performance, we also saw that players tended to take riskier shots when playing with superstars.
So for our data, we used PGA Tour round level data from 2017 to 2024. This was scraped off of datagolf.com. And so some of the variables from this data set that we want to use and look at is strokes gained, the event, the season, which round number the golfers were playing in, the tee time for the round. And we used this to determine the pairings for each event. And to do that, we did a self-join on the event, the round number, the tee time, and the season. And we had to filter out observations where the players were the same. So, for example, like Scotty Scheffler playing with, let's just say, Rory McIlroy, Xander Schauffele, and a fourth golfer. And we had to eliminate pairings where Scotty Scheffler appeared as golfer one and golfer two. With this, we also had to aggregate the strokes gained to get a couple other of our variables that we wanted to see. So we had to get the average. So we just took the mean of each golfer over their career, I believe. We did the same thing for the opponents. And then we aggregated to see if the opponent played better than expected, which was just an equation of opponent total strokes gained minus their average strokes gained. And then lastly, we made tee time a quadratic and also turn it into minutes rather than have it by an exact hour-minute time. We also used an earnings data set from 2017 to 2024 also. We use these to determine categories and superstars. The categories we took similarly from the Gurian et al. Paper that Colin just talked about, where category one was golfers who were top 25 in earnings in the season, who also won an event in that season. Category 1A was top 25 and did not win an event that season. Category 2 was everyone else in the top 25 that was not in Category 1 or 1A. Category 3 was all other professionals that were outside of the top 25. And Category 4 or Category Other was sponsor exemptions and amateurs who were able to play in that event. And then all our superstars, we defined that as just top 5 earners for that season. And we'll take it next to the methodology slide. So for our methodology, we wanted to focus on using only the first 2 rounds of the event because once you get past that cut day of day 2, you're going to get players with similar performances. They're often going to be paired together. They're going to be playing the best at that tournament. So we wanted to try and get more of where players will not be playing as great to see what effect these higher level players will have on them. For our models, we used regressions. We did this to allow for estimation of marginal effects of playing with people with different abilities while controlling for the categories that I just talked about. For the individuals and round numbers, which I will talk about how we can control for that next. And we also, how I mentioned, using start time as a quadratic. So to control for event, round number, tee time, and season, we ran a fixed effects model and clustered the robust standard errors for each unique grouping. This was just because each group had multiple observations, and without the robust standard errors, these standard errors would be inflated due to the OLS assumption that they're independent observations. Player ability, that is going to be a measure that we're going to focus on a lot throughout our 3 regression models, which we're just measuring this based strictly off of the average strokes gained of the player. And so for our regressions, we wanted to determine the effects of opponent average, the opponent playing better than expected, and the superstar, how each of those independently affected a golfer's performance. So here we have our first model. This is our opponent average model. So for, as I just talked about, our fixed effects model with the season, event, and so on, they are a part of this model. You see they're not in the results. These were omitted just because there was such a large amount of variables involving the tee times. It was going to be extremely long, so it's still in there, just omitted. What we want to focus on here is the strokes gained average opponent variable. It's about the third down here in the predictors column. So for every stroke gained by the opponent, we concluded that the golfer will gain about 0.034 strokes, and we see that this is significant here at basically anything above like a P level of 1%. You see here for the category variable towards the bottom here, these would be which category the golfer played in. So category 1 is in the intercept, but if the golfer were to be in category 1A, then they would gain about 0.035 strokes. On the right, we just have a marginal effect line graph. So you see it's a linear relationship. The better the opponent plays, the better the golfer themselves will play. And we'll take it next to the opponent playing better than expected model. So as I mentioned before, with our aggregations, this was just calculated by taking the opponent's strokes gained total, subtracting it by their average just to see if they played better than expected. Here we have that for every stroke gained added for the opponent, then the golfer will play approximately 0.025 strokes gained that they will have. Again, like our opponent average model, it's a linear relationship between the two. If the opponent plays better than expected, the golfer will play to that level and have more strokes gained over the round. And we'll take it last to our superstar effect model. As I mentioned before, these are the top 5 earners per year. So in the very bottom, the very last row, we have the superstar. When playing with a superstar, a golfer will gain about 0.092 strokes, which contradicts the results of the McFall-Rothoff paper, where when playing with Tiger Woods, the golfers would play more risky and would cause them to lose strokes on the round. The strokes gained would decrease. Here, the strokes gained increases, which we kind of concluded that players don't really fear these top superstars like Scotty or Xander Schauffele, and they don't play quite as risky as compared to playing against prime Tiger Woods, who was winning tournaments left and right by such wide margins. For the marginal effect graph on the right, you see it's a little bit different here. Rather than more of an angled line, these are straight vertical lines with 0 and 1 on the x-axis. This is just strictly being that the superstar opponent was a binary variable of being 0 and 1. So based off of if it was not a superstar, it would vary on how players would play versus as if it were. And one other thing I wanted to mention here in the past, with the past 2 slides of the categories, the category 4/other sponsor exempt, their coefficients have been very similar to category 2. And we kind of just concluded that these amateur sponsor players are playing at such a high level that the only reason why they're not a part of this category 2 is because they don't have the tour card, that they're being exempt for these and have that special privilege of being able to play rather than being in a tournament every week. It's more of a rare occurrence.
So, like, the main takeaway that we can get from this is golf is not just a solo game. At the end of the day, yes, you're playing for yourself. Your score comes from you and you only. It's not like a traditional game of football, basketball, tennis, whatever you want to say, where there's back and forth. There's a defense, there's an offense. You're actually on a playing surface playing against somebody. They're trying to stop you or, get past you, whatever it is. But we could see that from the pairing dynamics, we see effects on own performance scoring. We saw a positive relationship between partner ability and strokes gain, whether that is from a competitive drive behind these players to play better when they are playing with better opponents. And the same thing could be said about how, partner performance positively impacted player performance when they were playing better than expected as well. These are professionals at the end of the day. They want to be the best of the best. They are the best of the best for a reason. And when they see players, playing better than them or just playing good in general, playing better than they expected them to play that day, all these players have drive. They want to play that good. They want to be the best out there. So, that could be the reason behind why they're doing this. Also, we saw that playing with a superstar had the most significant impact. We saw just from playing with a superstar alone, it had the same effect as playing with someone 3 strokes gained higher than you, or playing better that day, 3 strokes gained higher. And what that just kind of shows that again, kind of piggybacking off the first two, that playing with better opponents, playing with higher skilled opponents, just makes you want to play better. Again, like I said, these are professionals at the end of the day. And I just think the one thing I want to add on to this is we see from the modeling and the relationships, we see like the scoring, we don't get the reason behind it. One of the things that we've talked about and could be a big influence on this is when you're playing with better opponents in golf, whoever scores better on the previous hole, they get the tee is what it's called. And they get to go first, and you get to see a better player where they want to hit their first shot, where they want to hit their second shot. And so what you get with that is, you kind of get to see where they're playing it and how you may want to, play similarly to them. If they're, taking their drive down the right side of the fairway, you can go up there and, kind of be like, okay, I'm seeing Scotty Scheffler go down the right side of the fairway. I should probably do that as well. He knows what he's doing. He's been playing very good recently. And that just kind of, possibly a reason why we see these heightened scores when you're playing with better opponents and playing with better opponents that are playing better that day. But there could also be different reasons why, just the, increased focus, increased drive, maybe just they love playing under pressure, whatever it may be. But we see that it emphasizes the role on social and competitive dynamics in golf. Again, at the end of the day, people like to think this is a solo game. They're playing for themselves, but there's more that goes into it. Seeing, your partner play better makes you want to play better, as from what we saw in this. And this can just have a big impact on mental coaching for players, whether they have a mental coach or, they're just doing it on their own. If they see, someone performing better, they know they got to step it up, they got to perform better. But one thing that I took away from this is on the other aspect, and Hunter can attest to this because we played golf together in high school, is when you see someone playing worse, you kind of think, okay, I could take a shot off, I could take a stroke off, I don't have to hit the perfect shot here. But really, with the mental coaching aspect, is you can get back into the game and tell yourself, hey, like, just because they're not playing as good doesn't mean I can, take this shot off, take this round off, whatever it is. I still need to play to the best of my ability. And that's where something like this can have a big impact on mental coaching. I just want to say thank you. And obviously, if there's any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Great. Thank you very much. That was great. Any questions? Roland.
Yes, I noticed on a couple of your slides, if I read them correctly, that the pace of play was significant, although it wasn't a very large effect. Been a lot of talk about that recently. Did you focus on that at all? Notice anything particular?
I could say there wasn't much that we paid attention to this. I see your point. I don't remember the name of the golfer, but how they would take extremely long in between shots, would play slower, and that would really annoy some of the other golfers. So I see maybe your point of maybe not looking at quite the quadratic here, but at least for the total minutes, maybe perhaps the longer the round goes, the more players can even get in their own heads, causing them to play worse golf. But yeah, that was not really much we looked at. It was more of just how the opponents affected rounds rather than the elements per se.
Sure. Good job.
And just like add on to this, even looking at it, you don't see anything with the quadratic term there because you just see the zeros, but there is numbers eventually. It's so small. But what that's showing is, as the day or as the round goes on, stuff like that. A lot of times these rounds start in the morning. So what that means is, as the round goes on, greens are drying up, fairways are drying up, the ball's rolling better, the greens are rolling more true. And we see that, they might not be performing as well, but they're starting to, increase and get there to where they, they're not declining their performance as much. So that I just want to throw that out there that, you might not be able to see anything with the quadratic term, but there is something there showing that as the day goes on, the round goes on, they are starting to perform a little bit better.
Great, thank you. So I guess we have 1 minute left if there's another real quick question. Okay, great. So I can start to introduce our next speaker.
Okay, if there's no more questions, we'll move on to our third talk. So that's going to be done by Austin Ambler and Ethan Katz from Syracuse University, and they're going to be talking about using Bayesian modeling to simulate fantasy football. So you guys have the stage.
Thank you. Let me share my screen real quick. Is everyone able to see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so my name is Austin Ambler. I worked on this project with Ethan Katz. Unfortunately, he was not able to be here today, so I'll be speaking on behalf of both of us. We are both students at Syracuse University studying sport analytics, and our project is on Bayesian modeling to simulate fantasy football. So the NFL week and the fantasy football season ends Monday night, and as there's only a couple players left in fantasy football matchups, so every Monday night, Matthew Berry, a fantasy analyst at NBC Sports, always posts out a Monday night miracle. He says what he needs to win his matchup. So last week he said he needed Joe Mixon to score 14 points or less. So you go to ESPN or Yahoo Fantasy or Sleeper and you see he's projected 17.3 points, but you need 14 points or less, but it doesn't tell you the probability of that happening. So we wanted to figure out like what percentage of the time Joe Mixon scores 14 points or less. We want to know the probability. How often does that happen? So that is what we set out to do with our model. So we made a fantasy football model. We started with our variable selection. We then trained a model on 2019 to 2023 data. We then used that trained model to predict the 2024 season, and we presented our results in a Shiny app at the end. So starting with the variable selection, we're going to start with some player-specific variables. It's important to note that all these variables are average variables based on what they've done in previous games. So we start with average fantasy points, their target share, their air yards share, their carry share, their expected fantasy points. And then we also have these per depth variables. So we want to look at how many points what the target share and carry share of the wide receiver one on a specific team was. So what is the average fantasy points from the wide receiver one, the wide receiver two, the wide receiver three on the Chiefs in previous games? Same thing for running backs. What's the carry share of the RB1, RB2 on a team, etc. We wanted to see if teams used a workhorse back or if they had more of a split backfield. And same the receivers, do they throw to an alpha wide receiver or do they have a split receiver? And it's important to note that depth charts are fluid. They change every week. For example, DeAndre Hopkins was not even on the Chiefs to start the year. So as he came up, he moved up to the wide receiver one on the Chiefs. Same thing with Kareem Hunt. He didn't even start the year on the Chiefs. When he signed with the Chiefs, he was like their RB3 and he slowly worked his way up to the RB1. Also, some teams might not even have a wide receiver one at the start of the year. The Buffalo Bills didn't have an alpha wide receiver, but as Khalil Shakir starting to earn more targets throughout the year, he became a wide receiver one throughout the year. We also included first downs per game and how many years of experience to account for age. So it was also important to look at team and opponent variables. So how good the team is and how good is your opponent you're playing against. So team points per game, what the team's run percentage is, how many team receiving fantasy points, how many team rushing fantasy points the team gets per game, how many plays the team runs per game, how many fantasy points the rest of your position on your team scores, how many team points the opponent team gives up, how many fantasy points a team gives up to each position. And the important one here is position ranks for Mike Clay. So Mike Clay works at ESPN. He's a fantasy football analyst. At the beginning of the year, he does positional room ranks. So he ranks quarterback rooms, wide receivers, running backs, tight ends, offensive line, D-line, DBs, safeties, outside linebackers, and inside linebackers. So this is a way for us to account for future data, as a lot of these other stats are past data. So we want to account for future. So how good is the offensive line of a team expected to do? This was also the best way we were able to account for offensive lines and defensive lines, because obviously running backs with a better offensive line should be projected to score more fantasy points. We can also take into account the secondaries, the better secondaries, the worse that the receivers and tight ends are going to do. And we can also take into account when players move from a new team. For example, Saquon Barkley moved from one of the worst offensive lines in the league to one of the better offensive lines in the league. We're able to take that into our account in our model. Now, for the rookies, we had to add some extra variables, as they don't have any fantasy stats when they start the season. So they had all team variables listed before, but we also added a draft value. This is a standard draft value curve. So for example, Marvin Harrison Jr., the 4th overall pick, his average value is 25.8. This is just a standardized curve. We also did their pick by position. So Marvin Harrison Jr. was the first of his position drafted. So he would be like the first receiver drafted. And we did this for all positions. And we didn't use college scouting stats because production doesn't equal skill. You get drafted based on your athletic talent. You don't get drafted based on having the most receiving yards or passing yards. So once we had all our variables, and for 2019 and 2024, it was time to make our model with all our data collection combined. So all of our data is publicly available data from NFL versus in R, and the input variables are updated every week, and all variables are used in games up to that week. So for example, for our first 3 weeks of the year, I'm going to use this as a 2024 season example, but we did this for all the years in our training data too. So for the first 3 weeks, all 2023 and 2024 games counted equally. So if we're making our week 3 projection, let's say they played 10 games in 2023 and 2 games in 2024, all 12 games would be accounted equally as we're trying to calculate their average variables. So we're doing this for every single one of our variables to get their average input variables. For weeks 4 through 8, we took 50% of their previous year stats, 50% of this year's stats. So for example, for our week 6 predictions, let's say they had a target share of 20% in 2023 and a target share of 30% in 2024. Their input variable for that week would be 25% for their target share. And for weeks 9 through 18, we only looked at their 2024 games. And with rookies had their own model for the first 3 weeks, but once they had enough sample size, starting in week 4, rookies joined the overall model. And injured players are treated on a case-by-case basis. For example, Aaron Rodgers only had 4 snaps in 2023, so we used his 2022 stats in 2020 instead of 2023. Christian McCaffrey, who didn't make his debut to after week 9 this year, we used his 2023 games for his first couple weeks predictions. And again, this was for us to get our input variables for all our years in both our training and testing data. So once we had all our data collection, it was time for us to model. So we made 2 types of models. We did an XGBoost model and a Bayesian regression model. So the XGBoost model gives you point estimates. What does this mean? You get 1 predicted value for each player for each week. But for the Bayesian regression, you get a distribution of values. You get a distribution graph of all possible distributions of fantasy points for a given player in a given week, and this way we're able to get probabilities. So explaining some of the more math behind the Bayesian regression, it uses a Markov chain Monte Carlo simulation to estimate the posterior distributions of coefficients. So what does this mean? So for a normal linear regression, You get one value for the intercept and one value for the coefficient value. The parameters are fixed. But for a Bayesian regression, you get a distribution of values for the intercept. You get a distribution of values for the coefficient. This gives you a distribution of values for the y variable. So for example, if we did 2,000 iterations of our simulation, we get 2,000 sets of coefficients. With 2,000 sets of coefficients, we get 2,000 predicted values for our y variable, which is fantasy football points, instead of just one predicted value for the XGBoost model. So looking at some of the results of the models, we're going to look at the importance graph of our XGBoost model. These are the variables that our model deemed were the most important, and these are similar results to the Bayesian model as well, based on significance levels there. So fantasy points for depth, average fantasy points, average expected fantasy points, first downs, target share, average target share. This all makes a lot of sense. The more fantasy points you scored in the past will lead to more success in the future. And again, target share, and I think the next two variables were carry share. So the more targets and carries, the more touches you get, the more fantasy football points you are going to score. So taking a look at our results here, I'm going to give it a couple seconds to load into our Shiny app here. And we did this for quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. Can you guys see the Shiny app okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. So I'll do an example here with quarterbacks. So you can choose any player. So I'm going to use Baker Mayfield as an example. First, we have his percentile rankings. So these are based on his stats for all qualified quarterbacks. You need 14 pass attempts a game to be qualified. So for example, Baker Mayfield is in the 94th percentile in passing touchdowns among all qualified QBs. But what I want to point out here is this table on the right. So the predicted points column is what our XGBoost model, this was their point estimate. This is their one estimate that model gave us of what they expected to happen. I want you to notice how in the first couple weeks of the year, Baker Mayfield was only projected 14, 15, 17 points a game. But as he scored 28, 23, 25, 27, at the rest of the year, his predictions went up 21, 20, etc. So you can see how our model adjusts as the season goes on and adjusts how his average fantasy points went up. All of his passing stats went up. Therefore, his predicted Y value went up as well. And if you look at the in-season rankings, you can see all of every player, what their, to the left of this vertical line is their actual fantasy points. To the right of the line is their predicted fantasy points for the rest of the year. You can sort it by a specific week. You can also only look at the rest of the season if you wanted to. We also have just our preseason predictions. So if we wanted to look at all of Baker Mayfield, this is what it is before the season. You can see how at the beginning of the year, he was only projected 12, 14 points in the last couple of weeks when our updated model has him at 20 points. So you can see how our model adjusts throughout the time. And again, we also have our preseason rankings for all our players. And we did this for running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. But those were our XGBoost predictions. Now I want to look at our Bayesian predictions. So let's say this Monday Night Football game is Ravens versus the Chargers. I have Lamar Jackson on my fantasy team. Let's say I go into Monday Night Football. He's our last player I have. My opponent has no one else. And I'm down by 25 points. I can see that he has a 37% chance of scoring 25 points. This makes sense. He's averaging about 22, 23. You can see the center of this distribution is right around 22, 23, most of his outcomes. So again, we have 2,000 different predicted values for each player. So this is a graph of all 2,000 of his predicted values that Lamar Jackson could have. There's not just one estimate, there's 2,000 estimates, and you can get a probability of him scoring any amount of points and see how often that happens. You can also do this one-on-one. So let's say my opponent has Ladd McConkey and I have Lamar Jackson and I'm losing by 10 points. I can see that I can win 37% of the time. All the values in the Charger blue is how often Ladd McConkey will win this fantasy matchup. All the values in purple is Lamar Jackson. And again, I can do this with 2-on-0. Let's say I'm in a super flex league with Herbert and Lamar Jackson, and I need 60 fantasy points. it's a very low probability of that happening. So those were our Bayesian results, and it's just some improvements and next steps. We want to update those might play team position rankings throughout the year. We also want to combine wide receivers and tight ends together, as the tight end one on the Chiefs, Travis Kelce, is a lot different than the tight end one on the Giants and Daniel Bellinger. We want to add offensive scheme. We have years of experience, but we could also look at career stats. And it's hard to value teams getting either a new quarterback or a change in their offensive system. For example, it was hard to project how Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, and Joe Mixon were going to do in their new system as they switched teams. And we could have also added some sort of injury risk model, as that could affect availability. So thank you guys for listening. This QR code will take you to the Shiny app. However, it is better to look on the desktop. So there's my Twitter link, and the Shiny app is in the link in the bio. So are there any questions? Thank you, guys.
Hey, I just want to say great job.
Thank you.
I'm a big fantasy football fan too. So I just wanted to ask, like, maybe not a more, it's not an analytical question, but like, what was your inspiration behind the project?
Yeah, going back to kind of what I said, like my friend and I, who wasn't here today, we both love fantasy football. I always wanted to make a little fantasy football model. Like last year, I saw those percentile graphs in my app. I just made those like last year, but we wanted to build upon that. So we talked about making a model, and then we saw how like these Monday Night Miracle things happen, and we thought it would be super cool to get probabilities. And we thought that's also different because you don't see like a lot of distribution of point totals and all that. So we thought that was kind of cool to have. So yeah, we just always wanted to make a fantasy football model. So we decided this was a good way to do it.
Great. Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions, comments? Happy to feedback, any recommendations?
So does fantasy football like have the data on their website, or like where are you pulling the data from or
All
scraping?
this data is from the NFL Fast Start package in R.
Okay.
They have historical data with fantasy points per week, both standard and PPR. They have all the target share stuff. I mean, some of the variables were calculated, but it was all throughout, and it was all publicly available data in NFL Fast Start, NFL Verse in R.
That's good. That's cool.
Yeah.
That was connected to the question I was going to ask regarding the data is that I haven't used that package before. So does the package scrape the most recent data on demand, or is the data updated into the package? Give me a sense of how that works.
Yeah, they have historical data, I think going back to 2006. I can like load weekly stats and I just choose the years I want.
Yeah, I'm saying like the 2024, like, week 12, week 13 is does that package have the appropriate, I guess, functions to scrape the most recent data? Is that how it's working?
Uh, yeah, yes. Every week I re-update. They update their package, like the new games. If a game ends at like 4 o'clock, that data is already in there by 8 o'clock. So they
Okay.
update very quickly, and then I have the same functions in my code that will update all the input variables, yeah, after every week. But yeah, it's pretty quick how they update within like a couple hours after each game.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's really good talk.
Thank you.